Everybody, we are going to move on to our second presentation, Group 4, myself, Devin Brevig, and Derek Janis. And this second presentation, the second part of what we have is on e-voting. So we're going to take a look at not only e-voting in person at machines, but e-voting online as well. I'm going to tackle them both as we move into our first slide. So a general overview, what is e-voting? We need to establish that right off the bat. A 2005 article on Wired.com simply refers to e-voting as computerized voting machines that use electronic ballots rather than paper ones. That article came out a little bit before the advent of online voting. There are some countries and even some jurisdictions in the United States that will allow people to fill out their ballots online and do it without ever having to go to a polling place or mail in a ballot. So those are two types of electronic voting. But we're going to focus on machines here for just the next little bit. The same article on Wired.com noted that e-voting machines are also known as direct recording electronic machines. We'll call those DREs throughout the day here. And there are three types of e-voting machines that voters can cast ballots on. Essentially, three different ways to do the same thing. You have touch interface machines that's much like a smartphone or a tablet where you just touch the buttons on the screen, and that's how you make your picks and choose your candidates. Punch key machines utilize a keyboard for making selections. And then there are machines that use a wheel. They rotate buttons around, and then you tap the corresponding button as you move the wheel around. So we continue on looking at the difference between an e-voting machine, that should say, and an optical scanning machine. Optical scan machines, you'll see those in a lot of polling places, but those are not used for actually casting ballots. Optical scan machines, as you see, per Wired, use an electronic reader to record the vote, but not to cast it. So from personal experience, when I went to fill out my ballot a few weeks ago, I voted in person. I filled out a paper ballot, fed it to an electronic tumbler that read the vote and cast it for me, counted it for me, I should say, as you see there. Not free of glitches or errors, but Wired notes that mistakes can be fixed with these machines. Since the hard copies of the ballots still exist, you're just feeding them in, and it's counting the ballot for you. So on we march. A good visual here of what some of these machines look like. On the left, bottom left, you see a DRE, a direct recording electronic machine, and that would be a touch interface where you cast your ballot, and it takes you through the whole process. You pick your candidates and all that on there. And on the right, you see a tumbler. That is where you would feed a paper ballot into, and it would, as you feed your ballot in, the screen would pop up with the candidates you chose. You'd confirm that they're correct, and on you go. It just counts it for you. Roy Saltman noted in a 1978 study that electronic punch card systems were first used in 1964. So we go to the early 60s. This slide is just kind of a history of electronic voting. Wired also notes that electronic touch screen systems did not become widespread until about 2000. Of course, big situation in Florida, George Bush and Al Gore in that election. And that's after that point, they kind of started pivoting to online to avoid everything that happened with the recount there. And the Help America Vote Act in 2002 allotted $4 billion towards helping states install that updated technology, again, sort of in the wake of what happened in 2000. Devin, I'll defer to you here. Tell us, is e-voting standardized within the United States, or is it still sort of the Wild West type situation?
Yeah, so The Atlantic said in an article in 2017 that the standardization in e-voting in the U.S. is essentially a crapshoot. It says that some jurisdictions still use machines to leave no paper trail after a voter casts their ballot. And the article also says that it goes on to advocate for standardized machines that all print paper ballots after a voter casts his.
And we'll back, yeah. Good job, Devin. We'll back up a little bit. You should note that some of the touchscreen machines, some of the electronic machines that you would cast your vote on, print out a paper trail after you finish voting, tells you who you voted for. You can double check, make sure there are no errors. But not every machine has that. Some machines, you just cast your ballot and then away they go. And you just kind of hope that it's accurate. So that is what the Atlantic is arguing for there, is that if we're going to get standardization within the United States, you got to have machines that have a second layer of security. So just to make sure that people vote for the right candidates that they intended to vote for. Standardization continues. Derek, I'll let you take us through this slide, which sort of tells us what states can do. And Derek, as you'll tell us here in a minute, it's so much up to the states when we get to this sort of thing.
Yes, you're absolutely right. According to the National Conference of State Legislators, it's up to the individual state to create their set of standards for the voting in their machines. It's not centralized. As I said, it's up to each individual state. Some prioritizes it, others not so much, as we see. Voting standards are intended to foster security, functionality, privacy, usability, and accessibility. This is all pretty much self-explanatory to make sure our votes are protected, they're private, they're able to be counted, and they're able to be used by everybody regardless of where you are in the country. According to ncsl.gov, the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, or EAC, was established by the Federal Help America Vote Act, or HAVA, of 2002 and charged with developing voluntary voting state guidelines. These guidelines outline specifications against which voting systems can be tested. This is kind of like the guidelines of how these systems are tested and make sure nothing goes wrong.
Exactly, and we pulled that last line right off the NCSL's website. So much of the guidelines that the federal government passes, when we look at this, is they're voluntary measures. Just the states can decide whether to follow or go against and do their own thing. So as we've alluded to here, it's a lot of the Wild West. A lot of states are just on different pages, as we'll see on a slide coming up a little bit later. But we move into a common question: is e-voting safe and secure? And that's a question that has been questioned by experts. A 2020 article, again by Wired, so same source, but a little bit later on, noted that some U.S. voters are able to vote online due to disability or military service. I think I actually made a mistake there. I think there should be more to that sentence. Some voters can vote online if you have a disability or if you're in the military, but not a lot of voters can do that, and for good reason. You know, they don't want to allow too many people to vote online just because of the firewalls and everything needed. That can go wrong with that. West Virginia is a state that allows online vote casting, but it's very limited for just a very select group of people. The federal government says that electronic ballot return technologies are high risk. That refers to the more in-person machines. Even with controls in place, a lot of the technology in these machines is outdated. And you might think to yourself, well, hospitals and banks use these online technologies, but they are a little bit more able to recover from attacks than an election is. Of course, when we start talking about hacking and everything that can go wrong with an election, can be quite the threat to any nation's democracy and the system they have in place. So election interference isn't quite the same as a hospital's system getting hacked, and we talked a little bit about hospitals earlier. And a Medium article from 2020 points out that while online voting has some benefits, it probably isn't worth it, as it just can't be proven safe every time. And you want to make sure that what you've got is a good product, time in, time out. Just can't quite guarantee that with online voting. Security measures in the United States. Pardon me, e-voting booths are more secure than online voting. And I talked a little bit about that earlier. It's because when you vote online, you've got firewalls and things like that, but it's a little bit easier for hackers to get in and cause problems rather than those in-person machines. Most voting booths, as we've talked about, are now able to print out paper receipts to help against indiscrepancies, but still, not all of them. It's just most of them at this point. A GBH article from 2020 says that voting booths, though, are easy to hack, and that experts say that foreign countries can have the technology to get in there and kind of alter those machines and make them report funky things. So there is the ability to hack these voting machines. And cybersecurity experts note that the federal government, Congress, doesn't quite take the threat of an attack very seriously. $380 million was allocated in 2018 for improving these technologies, but that's just simply not enough for a changing world. As we move more online and bad guys have the ability to alter these things, you need a little bit more money to keep up with the changing technology. Advantages of e-voting, and we'll kind of split this up. Devin, why don't you take us through the first couple of advantages here, and then we'll hear from Derek a little bit.
All right. So the first advantage is ease of access. It's easier for voters to vote online as they can do this entirely from a remote location, especially in today's pandemic. It would drastically cut down the need for people to venture out. So we saw a lot of talks on TV about people wanting the option of e-voting. They wanted the ability to vote online as opposed to sending in mail-in ballots, because that was a whole conundrum itself. And so the ease of access of e-voting is a very, very big advantage to it. It can also save time. So online voters don't need to worry about going back and forth between the polling place, waiting in line, things like that. For voters voting in person at the machines, the process can go quicker and speed up the lines. So you're not spending 2.5 hours down at the courthouse waiting for your chance to cast your vote. And good user interface, I'm assuming?
Yeah, good user interface is what that should say.
So good user interface. So physical ballots may confuse some voters, especially first timers. So it makes it kind of user accessible, makes it easy, makes the process simple, and helps them know who they're choosing. It's very, very obvious and distinct.
Derek, we'll go to you for 4 and 5.
All right. The last two advantages can be accurate. And e-voting is in many ways a direct response to the situation that happened to Florida during the Al Gore George Bush election. If these ballots have been virtual, these mistakes wouldn't have happened. There would have been no missteps with the paper, no ballots missing or recounts. It would have been all online in one place immediately, no chance of mistakes. And the fifth one is more eco-friendly. Though machines do use paper receipts to limit these mistakes that could happen, it is much less intensive than printing out many paper ballots. This way you save trees, it's better for the environment, and a good environment is a good country, and good country is a healthy world.
A lot of good positives there. As we've got just a couple of minutes left, we'll blast through the disadvantages of e-voting, but that is not to limit them. First one we've got, not secure. The outdated software on many voting machines makes them vulnerable to infiltration from outsiders. Online voting is also a little more impractical, I would say, due to the threat of hacking and other attacks. So those hackers can get into the machines and they can get into the firewalls and cause some problems with online voting, as well as those DREs we talked about earlier. Less reliable. Voting machines can break down. We saw this in the Chicago suburbs earlier this year, and we saw this during the Georgia primaries this summer. Machines went down on election day, and that led to a lot of negative pushback from voters who felt like they have been disenfranchised and maybe their right to vote was infringed upon. Georgia had some things going on in the years before, but when those machines go down and that's the only option you have, you've got a lot of problems. So you want to make sure that those machines at least aren't going down on election day. Very bad time for them to go down like that. They can be inaccurate. It's rare. Now, don't get me wrong, very rare, but there have been instances where machines will glitch out a little bit and cast inaccurate ballots. Say someone voted, we'll just say voted Democrat, but they meant to vote Republican, and it shows up that they did vote Republican through the interface. Obviously, that's a problem, or vice versa. Without a paper trail, because we mentioned not every machine does have paper trails, this would result in them voting for the wrong candidate, not even knowing it. So certainly not a good thing there. Maintenance. As machines age and new softwares are released, these machines need to be maintained and kept up with. Also, as the hardware ages, they need to be, make sure they're still running quick. So this results in costs and manpower, both of which are needed to keep things secure, and these costs can add up. And they're unavoidable. You need to maintain them, stock them with paper, things like that to keep them up and running. So it can get pricey pretty quick, not to mention the cost of the machine. Some questions that we will knock out pretty quick as we do start to run over our time. Apologies there. Is e-voting widely used in the United States? The short answer is yes. Pew Research indicates that 47% of voters live in jurisdictions that only use optical scan voting. 28% live in DRE-only jurisdictions. That is a quarter of the country that can only vote through those DRE machines. And you have a nice little graph there. Hope you saw it. Our opinion about the use of e-voting machines. Now, we feel as a group that the use of e-voting machines is a useful thing to have in the United States for a few reasons. And those reasons are that it helps people with disabilities vote, and people who are in the military at that, who can't get back to vote, helps them do that in time, and if done securely, can expedite the process of getting those votes out to the public. But that said, we believe that voting machines must be made as secure as possible, and online voting systems need to be as secure as possible, and that more financial resources have to be invested in the process to ensure this. And Devin, I'll let you take the next one.
All right, so would we be more comfortable voting online remotely? So like Joey said, we agreed as a group we would be more comfortable voting online in some smaller municipal elections, but not for matters that would determine the House, Senate, or presidency. We feel that the process has too many errors right now for it to be an effective and safe tool in determining major offices. So in city elections where you're voting for city council, school board, stuff like that, we feel like it'd be good to use e-voting, but for big elections, the margin of error is just too small to trust e-voting.
And Derek, we'll defer to you for will online voting become the norm?
It may become the norm for people with outstanding circumstances, like you're in the military or you're disabled. Beyond those kind of groups, however, it will most likely not become norm, at least anytime soon. The process is too risky right now, and studies haven't associated the ability to vote online with any benefits that would outweigh the risks. Cons are a lot more than the pros right now.
And our experiences with voting on the web. Now, none of our group has experience voting online in any meaningful election, nor do we have much experience voted at machines, for example, and that's more me. I don't know about you two, actually, but when I voted in person earlier this month, it was a paper ballot. I turned it in, fed it to a tumbler, and it was counted digitally, but I did not cast my ballot online through one of those touchscreen interfaces. So I think that about does it for our presentation. It should. There might be one more slide. Nope, that is it for e-voting, the second presentation from Group 4, Devin Brevig and Derek Janis. I'm Joey Wright, and we hope you enjoyed taking a look at e-voting with us.